But if one of the speakers would like to come up. Hey. Mike.
Hello, people. Thanks for coming. My name is Mike Benning from the Alliance for Health Freedom. It's unfortunate we couldn't get permissions from the council today to march, so that's why we're here. But this won't be the first march or first gathering. It's still early days. Probably the reason we're all here is because of the Monsanto Protection Act that's been passed into law in the US. I'm not sure whether anyone's familiar with that. But that gives Monsanto now the right to, well, they're above the law in the USA. So the US Supreme Court can no longer touch Monsanto for breaking the law. So that's a fairly decisive moment in our history, and we've got to do something about that. We might think we're pretty safe here in Australia. We're not. By virtue of the free trade agreement we signed many years ago, US corporate law trumps Australian corporate law. Not sure whether too many people know that either. So it's really good. Most of you people here today are fairly hardcore, and we're really depending on you guys to get the message out in the community for any further activism or to further the cause. It's only going to get bigger. Now, I'm not too sure. Probably the other issue we have here locally in Australia is the GM wheat that's being worked on at the CSIRO. That's due to be released into the community in 2015. Right now, it's it seems that there's probably about 9 or 10 genes that have been spliced into this wheat that change the way starches are used in the wheat, and these same genes are very similar to the genetic activity in the human body. So it's quite possible these genes can change the way our bodies metabolize sugars in the pancreas and liver. So that could be quite dangerous. And knowing Monsanto, they'll probably only just do a 3-month study on mice and then just release into the community and say everything's great. CSIRO, look, they're whores, really. It's science for money these days. It's no longer a government body looking after the people. It's a government body looking after corporations and their bank balance. So we can't trust the CSIRO either. And just recently, there's Martin Stapin, a scientist at the CSIRO, who was sacked for whistleblowing. He said he'd like to be here today, but unfortunately he's got another talk on, a debate up on the Gold Coast. But he will be here in further campaigns. Look, John sort of summarised the history of Monsanto, and I'm pretty sure most people here are fairly committed and know the history, and you could probably do a Google web search if you really want to get there. But as I say, this is just the starting point. We're going to move out from here. Hopefully next time we get together we'll have the permissions for the march. The only reason we couldn't get permission is because there's another march on at Town Hall today. So unlike Monsanto, we decided to do the right thing and just conduct our campaign here. But if you'd all like to sign the petition that's going to go to government, but also give us your email addresses so we can stay in contact with you all, because this isn't, as I say, this is the beginning, and we've got some serious letters to write. Probably some of the first things we need to do is get on top of this GM wheat crop, but we've probably the most pressing thing is still the labelling laws here in Australia. We really need to get labelling on foods. You know, it's crazy. It's just insane. And you know, like the squeakiest wheel gets the most oil. So if we can just keep up those letters going to politicians, you know, they hate it. They absolutely hate their inbox being full. So that's really what we've got to do. But as I say, look, Yes.
And also the companies that are the manufacturers of the food, if they refuse to put the ingredients on the food, don't buy it.
Yeah, name and shame. Yeah.
Yeah, name and shame, and keep ringing them up and asking them for
Sure.
their ingredients.
Yes, of course. It's not just the politicians; it's the companies as well. We should be writing letters to them as well. It's not just politicians. Yeah, absolutely. And if they don't want to come to the party, name and shame. Yeah, absolutely.
We asked the government to label GMO foods and they refused to do it.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So who are they working for? Us or the corporations?
Well, the government's always been working for the corporations, but
The government is a corporation.
yeah, but look, things have changed and things are changing slowly. Way back, 40, 50 years ago, it was the corporations and the government, and today we've got the internet. And things are changing. Even the fact that we're here today is it's the impetus from, we couldn't have done this without, the internet. And all around the world, there are people all around the world today doing the same thing. So, the media's changed, and we can't depend on the media. They're whores too. They're repeaters. They're not reporters. They do a cut and paste. Yes.
It's probably just interesting to point out two things. One is that regarding the GM wheat issue in Australia, they've already been conducting trials. They've already, regarding the GM trials for wheat, they've already been conducting those in about 9 different places in Australia, and the contamination has even spread as far as Tasmania already. There's a Greenpeace report just out. The Australian Wheat Board is now privatised, and some of the main board members are actually linked to Monsanto and some of the other organisations who are involved in genetic modification. And the biggest thing for me in reading a lot about what's happening in Australia and the GM wheat is even the US have banned it. So, we're talking about nearly a $5 billion industry in Australia that one of the largest countries who supports genetic modifications has banned because they know how much damage it could do to their export as an industry. So we really need to get on top of this.
Yeah, that's right. And, look, I think we're all pretty aware of the future. We're looking at the collapse of the food chain as we know it. So, in the US and Europe, we've got the bees dying in the US. There was, I think, something like one quarter of the bee population. We had hive collapse in the US. That's attributed to nicotinoids, the pesticides. Europe have just banned the nicotinoids. We've got the monarch butterflies. They're dying because glyphosate killing all the milkweed that they feed on. And just recently, some rat studies in Europe have shown they actually did rat studies for the whole 2 years lifespan of the rat rather than just 3 months. And the whole lifespan of the rat, they all got cancer. So eating GM corn. So we've got a real battle on our hands, but it can be won. We just have to be passionate and collected. So look, I'll hand you to the next speaker.
Thanks, Michael. I've got to thank everyone for coming here today. This is a community support event, and without every single person here, this could not happen. This is really important to remember. Every single person here is a integral part of the community network. You as individuals are important as yourself, but together we are a force that is directing the future of our country. Exactly, we are awake. And first, I think we should get some chanting going on. So I'm going to just repeat, woo! So just repeat after me. Hell no, GMO.
Hell no, GMO!
Organics, yes we grow.
Organics, yes we grow!
Hell no, GMO.
Hell no, GMO!
Organics, yes we grow.
Organics, yes we grow!
Hell no, GMO.
Hell no, GMO!
Organics, yes we grow.
Organics, yes we grow!
All right, woo! Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand the mic over to Beatrice Ludwig. She is a solicitor, a permaculture designer. She handed in a citizen submission regarding to the OTTR. Anyway, I'll let Beatrice explain that. And Beatrice will be talking about the patent issues surrounding GMOs. Okay, give Beatrice a warm hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't actually be talking about my submission to the OGTR. There's too many things to actually talk about, so I'll have to confine myself to the actual patenting laws in Australia. Can you hear me now? Yeah? No? With the micro. Closer. Okay, this is it. Okay, so Ron Finley said, growing your own food is like printing money. And this is why we are all here today. Monsanto has managed to obtain a monopoly on the planting of certain seeds that have been genetically modified. Monsanto can claim ownership over these seeds and their offspring because the patent offices worldwide have been granting patents on genetically modified. Okay, so Monsanto can claim ownership over these seeds and their offspring because the patent offices worldwide have been granting patents on genetically modified organisms since 1980, when the US Supreme Court in Chakrabarti decided that GMOs can be patented in the United States. In the 30 years since, Australian courts have never been asked to decide whether this practice of granting patents on GMOs is actually legal in Australia or whether it is in breach of the Australian Patents Act. This is a jar of organic soybean seeds. It was given to me by a seed saver friend of mine for free, and when these seeds grow, I will save the seeds of the best plants, and I will plant them the next year, and I will share some of the seeds I share with my friends. And so this goes on year after year until I die, and until my children die, and until my grandchildren die. We will never have to buy seeds again. And this is how farmers have operated for thousands of years. And this is how Percy Schmeiser, a now 82-year-old Canadian farmer, operated for all his life. Percy Schmeiser, 15 years ago, found Roundup-ready canola on his property, despite never having planted it. The seeds could have been brought onto his property by bees or other pollinating insects. Percy never really found out how the seeds got there. The GM canola seed contains a dominant gene that cross-pollinated with Percy Schmeiser's carefully selected canola plants. The unwanted result was a GM canola crop. So what did Monsanto do? Monsanto, the patent holder of Roundup-ready canola, took Percy Schmeiser to court for breach of its patent, as it's done with thousands of other farmers since. The then almost 70-year-old Percy Schmeiser was now forced to spend the next 7 years in various courts defending his rights, defending all farmers' rights. The Canadian Supreme Court eventually held that Percy Schmeiser was in fact in breach of Monsanto's patent, that it did not matter how the original GMO canola seeds got onto his property, whether someone planted the seeds or whether the wind or insects had brought them in. What happened to Percy Schmeiser in Canada could not possibly happen in Australia, could it? There is, in fact, a GM contamination case pending in Western Australia, the Steve Marsh case. However, the Steve Marsh case does not concern itself with patentability of GMOs or genes. That is, I won't be talking about it now. A genetically modified organism is a human, animal, or plant that has a gene from another species artificially introduced into its genome. can genetically modified organisms be patented in Australia? What about genes, the origins of life itself? Can genes be patented in Australia? A very basic premise of patent laws worldwide is that only human inventions can be patented, not mere discoveries of something that already exists in nature. This very basic premise is also the basis of Section 18 of our Patents Act that sets out what is patentable. Despite this general understanding of the patent law, over the last 30 years, patent offices worldwide, including our patent office, have been granting thousands of patents on things that exist in nature, such as genes and other biological materials, as well as GMOs. But is this practice legal? Most of us in the general public would not have known anything about this practice, as it never affected us in the past. Most of us have never put our minds to what the consequences of the granting of patents over life would be. Australian courts have never been asked whether GMOs can indeed be patented. Australian courts had also never been asked to decide whether genes themselves could be patented. That is until last year, when Cancer Voices Australia sued Myriad Genetics in the Federal Court of Australia. Myriad Genetics, a company whose legal interests are aligned with those of Monsanto, had obtained a patent on a breast cancer gene, the BRCA gene, the gene recently made famous by Angelina Jolie. The BRCA1 gene is not an invention. It is something that exists in nature. It was discovered, not invented. Therefore, it should not be patentable. Judge Nicholas, the Federal Court of Australia judge, in his Myriad Genetics decision of 15 February this year, even acknowledged that a gene that is in the human body cannot be patented. However, Judge Nicholas then turned around and held that once the gene is isolated, that is removed from the human body, it can be patented. It is a bit like saying that if you chop a tree down into firewood, you can claim a patent on the firewood. With respect, the consequence of making an isolated gene patentable is that the gene in the human body and its genetic coding can no longer be freely used. In effect, the court held that a gene is patentable. What is disturbing is that the Myriad Genetics judgment of the Federal Court of Australia seems to take it a step further than the Canadian Percy-Schmeiser case. The Percy-Schmeiser case concerned a genetically modified organism, an organism that had an isolated gene from another species introduced. This altered organism is the subject of a patent, not the gene itself. The Myriad Genetics decision case, on the other hand, allows patents on actual existing genes. Nothing new is created by isolating the gene. In my view, the Myriad Genetics judgment is nonsensical and has the potential to result in very unfair outcomes, worse than the outcome of the Percy-Schmeiser case. It further erodes our patent law. There is, however, still hope. The second applicant, Yvonne Darcy, a cancer survivor, has appealed the Myriad Genetics decision to the full federal court. This hearing is expected to take place in August this year in the full federal court in Sydney. So what can we do? At a political level, let's promote a fair and ethical patenting system. Let's ask our MPs to not allow patents on genes, whether isolated or in situ, to not allow the patenting of biological materials, and to not allow the patenting of genetically modified organisms that can procreate. Let's follow the Myriad Genetics appeal case in the Federal Court of Australia and ask our media friends to write about it and its possible consequences. To farmers, I would say, don't enslave yourself to Monsanto by purchasing their substandard and expensive GMO seeds. Embrace resilient permaculture practices instead. Ron Finley said, growing your own food is like printing money. I would add, let's remove Monsanto's monopoly to print money. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. That was an amazing talk. Really important issues, focusing on the legal aspect. And that's how companies like Monsanto infiltrate into our government and gain control and influence the politicians. Also, there's an issue called substantial equivalence. And the Michael Taylor, who is now working for the FDA, and he worked for Monsanto for many years, and he weaved his way up the corporate and government ladder, and now he is, I think, like second in charge in regard to policy making in the FDA. He created a UN paper with the help of this biologist guy. That made it sound like genetically modified plants were equivalent to plants that had been created through breeding together the strongest of the species, which is obviously not the case. Also, this is a good time to mention the Western Australian farmer, Steve Marsh. His trial is set to be heard sometime in 2014. And the Safe Food Foundation along with Slater and Gordon, I think. They're the largest patent law firm in Australia. They are supporting Steve Marsh, and they are pro bono taking his case to court. Yep. Woo. So I just ask anyone to go to the Safe Food Foundation website and support their cause. Donate to the Steve Marsh cause. Over 70% of his previously organic certified farmland has been contaminated by GM canola from his neighbor. So Monsanto, these issues are not only a worldwide thing, but it's very local. These issues are dividing communities, like literally. Like Steve Marsh, he had no other recourse. There is no legal framework to help give compensation to people, to farmers whose crops have been contaminated by GM canola. So he had no other recourse except to sue his neighbor. And that has divided the community. And we all know farmers, they are one of the most hardworking people out there. You know, they struggle with drought, they struggle with all sorts of like horrible weather conditions, you know, consumer sentiment. You know, it's so many factors that are coming together to create lots of stress on farmers. So if you go to the Safe Food Foundation website, it's on the pamphlets here, and donate to the Steve Marsh cause. His like living costs are like gone up over 500,000 because he's lost his ability to grow organic certified foods. Okay, so let's make some more noise. That's why we're here. No Monsanto, 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 no Monsanto. Woo! Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Ingrid or Paul, whoever gets here first.
I'm standing.
Okay. So Paul, he is ex-mayor of Waverley Council and former member for Coogee of the state New South Wales government. So yeah, hand over to Paul.
Thanks for that. And I listened with interest to what Beatrice had to say and the earlier speaker had to say about politicians, having been in that position. The lobbying does work. It does have an effect. In New South Wales, and bear in mind I was in the State House, not the Federal House, we were able, myself and the former Green MLC, Ian Cohen, and surprisingly one of Fred Niles' colleagues, It was an odd mix of a left Labor, a Green and a Christian, but there you go. And we managed to maintain over a number of years a moratorium on the commercialisation of GM canola in New South Wales. And that was dealing with the now notorious Ian MacDonald, who was a minister at the time. And I won't say that Ian agreed with us, but what I will say is that we did year after year renew that moratorium. Now, unfortunately, that moratorium has now been lifted. And I understand the Victorians have similarly lifted the moratorium which previously applied to both canola and to the genetically modified wheat. I won't go over the ground that Beatrice went through. She specified particularly on the seed patenting part, but it was alluded to earlier that the position of farmers is extraordinarily weak when they're dealing with contamination arising from genetically modified crops. And this directly arises from the Gene Technology Act 2000, which was brought in by the Howard government. It was a Senate committee, there was a consideration by the policy branch of the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, who looked at the various options. And one of the options which was strongly advocated by gene ethics, organic farmers, and indeed some elements of the National Farmers Federation, was that there should be a strict liability situation whereby the liability sat with the polluter. Now, unfortunately, what transpired out of this was at the end of the day, they did not go down that path. They went down the path, same as the Brits had done and North America had done, and that was that there was a capacity for the common law was going to protect. Now, the reality is, as was mentioned earlier, the common law is again it's a common law principle of nuisance and trespass, which basically means that one farmer has to sue another farmer if you can identify that they're responsible for the damage done to your land. And in the case of an organic farmer, obviously there's issues of economic damage as well as other aspects, and the nuisance arising from that. Now, what that does, as was pointed out, is that sets community against community. It splits communities. You've got this happening in Corowa, I think, in New South Wales at present, certainly over in Western Australia in the case alluded to. What it also does is that Monsanto and the other companies involved in this, but primarily Monsanto in Australia, are able to avoid a liability. They are not responsible. And in fact, the Gene Technology Act, when you look at it, actually offers a significant protection for Monsanto and the other GMO promoters, biotech companies. And that is that it actually allows them to seek the Office of Gene Regulator, I think this is the process, to prosecute someone if there has been an unlawful use of the modified product on their land. Now that can cover, as was indicated, seeds dropping off the truck as it goes past. It can relates to birds dropping them. It may be carried by wind. And when you're talking about canola seed or rapeseed, they're incredibly tiny, and they can be carried hundreds, if not thousands, of metres by wind. And the farmer who has not attempted to grow, or in fact has rejected growing genetically modified crop, genetically modified the product, can still be prosecuted under the Gene Technology Act. Now, there is a discretion there that takes into account whether it's accidental, etc. However, that discretion is, I think, disturbing, because if you have got a regulator who's of the view that GMOs are good, or alternatively might be in the pocket of the producers, of the people, the license holders of the product, then they will probably find that it's a good reason to prosecute. So it's a very unhealthy situation we're in. Now, at the state level, the states are in a funny position. Whilst the feds under the Gene Technology Act can license the commercial use of various products, and as you'd be all aware, essentially that is reliant upon not independent scientific analysis, putting aside to this equivalence argument. It often relies on the arguments presented and the data presented by the companies, quite often through the US FDA. And so they rely upon that to permit the commercial growing. Now, or permit them for commercial use. Then the states have this bizarre little power, which is how we have moratoriums in New South Wales and other states, where because the states control land use planning, they can actually impose a moratorium on the use of a particular product. So you've actually got to tackle the states to... You've got two levels basically when you talk about tackling the politicians. One is to tackle federally to get amendments to the Gene Technology Act to try and get a strict liability provision in place that actually shafts the liability back to the licence holder, not relying on the common law between the farmers. And the other is to actually have the states reimpose a moratorium. Now, the problem you've got, of course, is that once this thing's out in the environment, particularly something like canola, it's virtually impossible to control. It's a small seed, it's very difficult to identify, and there has been examples where products which are believed to be organic have been contaminated by GMOs without any of the knowledge of any of the producers on the way through. So this is a very, very complex situation. It requires solid lobbying. It requires significant legal change to make sure we don't go down the path of the US in this regard. And just doing some research to update myself on this, because it's been a few years since I actually had a look at the updated stuff. I came across an article in The Land where Monsanto predicts GM rise. This is in April 5th of April 2013. And they're saying that GM plantings were currently about 176,000 hectares last year, or 11% of the national crop. And they're saying that this will remain stable at present, with farmers preferring other conventional herbicide-tolerant varieties. Now, I'm not going to get into the argument about organic as opposed to conventional varieties. What we really need to argue about here is to prevent the genetically modified variety getting in. Now, it's 11%. 11% means that 89% isn't contaminated in this fashion, and therefore we have got to stand the ground and try and wind this back. It's disturbing what happened down in Victoria with the wheat, because as was pointed out, even North America wouldn't cop the GM wheat. And North America has let all sorts of things happen. And you've got the total corrupting of the soy crop through North and South America largely. But I'm pleased to see the rally here, and I'm very pleased to see the number of people here who today. And I think you have to understand that when you talk about the politics of this, it's not limited to any one political party. There are people in the Labor Party, there are obviously people in the Greens, there are people in the Christian Democrats, there are people in the National Party. Put the Libs to one side, they're pretty hopeless on this, but the National Party, the old country party types in the National Party, not the White Shoe Brigade on the coast, but the country party types have got a very real concern about the impact on them as farmers and their constituents as farmers. So don't leave the National Party out of the equation here. Labor, Green, Christian Democrats, National, go after the whole lot of us.
Thank you, Paul. And I was just looking around, and I'm noticing the range of people we have here. We have, I can see prams. Can't see any babies yet, but I'm sure there's one. Hey. We have a wide range of people here, the young right through to the elderly, and it's amazing. So, the fine wine, aged fine wine. And yeah, it's just, anyway, my point is it's great that we have such a diverse range of people from our community. This is shows how Monsanto's, choose an example, their monocrop is not sustainable, whereas the diversity of our community is what gives strength to our community. In nature, you go to the Amazon and it is ridiculously diverse. It's so complex, and this is and we humans we come from that land. We come from that soil, and we represent the diversity of nature. So it's just amazing to see that, and I just love diversity. And thank you, and thank you for overcoming. And so, yeah, let's speak to Ingrid. Ingrid is currently council member for Waverley Council. Thank you.
Can't see you. Thank you very much. What an amazing crowd. Look at it, how it's grown. This is so good, so heartwarming. So the question was asked on Facebook. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. The question was asked, what are we meeting for? We are meeting to demand the right to remain healthy. And to live in a healthy environment. All the questions and arguments about patents and plantings and things, it all comes down to the fact that we want to be healthy, and we have that right. A lot of you know what I'm going to say, a lot of you have heard it before, but I'm hoping there will be people amongst you who don't know, who are going to learn something, whose spirits will be strengthened, who will go on to help us fight this battle that we have been fighting for 10, 20, 30 years, organics versus chemical farming. So I'm going to start, and the main direction of my talk is health. I hope you don't mind me reading because it's kind of a little bit difficult. There are acronyms and things like that. So a lot of the talk involves Roundup, Monsanto's trade name for glyphosate, a herbicide. The interest is mainly because crops have been genetically modified by Monsanto to tolerate the chemical while weeds die. Some 15 years later, most of the corn, soybeans and cotton cultivated in the US stems from these Roundup-ready seeds. There have been major problems. And I'm going to go over the three major problems. One is that genetically modified crops or organisms have been found in animal studies to cause serious health problems when consumed regularly. You heard a bit about that. Another is that residues of Roundup, which has been widely and intensively applied to crops, are found in food products, such as sugar, corn, soy, and wheat, and are highly toxic. Another is that Roundup-resistant superweeds flourished, and biocide use, both of Roundup and other herbicides, has soared. So they've had to use more because of superweeds. So regarding the last, according to the Huffington Post last September, a growing number of these crop acres are also reluctant hosts of Roundup-resistant superweeds. Repeated application of the herbicide has literally weeded out the weak weeds and given the rare resistant weeds the opportunity to take over. The situation, according to a report published last Friday, this is a quote, in the peer-reviewed journal Environmental Science Europe, has driven growers to use larger quantities of Roundup more often and in conjunction with a broader arsenal of other weed-killing chemicals. So not what they said it was going to do at all. Overall, this has resulted in an additional 404 million pounds of toxic pesticides doused on US fields. Between 1996, when genetically modified organisms were first introduced as farm crops, and 2011. That's a 7% increase. So that when they tell you it's going to lead to a reduction of biocides, they are wrong. Regarding the effects of food residues of glyphosate, all biocides, that's herbicides and insecticides, are toxic. You just have to look at the label. If we just look at glyphosate for a moment, in animals it has been found to kill the good gut bacteria, which are vital for health, including resisting growth of disease-causing bacteria. So highly pathogenic bacteria, such as those causing botulism, are not affected by it. So the good gut flora is affected and the bad bacteria do not seem to be affected. This is especially worrying regarding the risk of concentrated animal feeding operation chickens, CAFO chickens, becoming breeding grounds for botulism. Deadly botulism outbreaks in cattle have recently been linked to poultry litter contamination in Ireland. Also, glyphosate inhibits the major detoxifying enzymes in the liver. These are the cytochrome P450 enzymes, which are essential in limiting damage of toxins. So it actually prevents your body cleaning itself. Thus, glyphosate enhances the damaging effects of other foodborne chemical residues and environmental toxins. Insidious effects of low-level consumption of this chemical with the associated inflammatory events and presence of toxins are considered to predispose humans to gastrointestinal disorders, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression, autism, infertility, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease. And are these all not increasing in our society? Dissecting out which effects are due to genetic modification and which are due to herbicides may be difficult, but may be academic when GM crops are sprayed anyway. The final thing I mentioned. Last year, several studies linked genetically modified crops with serious health problems, and you heard about one of them earlier. One of these, published in the Journal of Food and Chemical Technology, showed rats fed a GM corn diet over a 2-year lifespan suffered mammary tumours, but not just mammary tumours, severe liver and kidney damage. Such comparative research strongly suggests that if humans were to consume such food over a longer period, we would suffer similar effects. Now, you all know the difference between GMOs and ordinary old plant breeding, don't you? I don't have to go there. Okay. Okay. So natural breeding processes have been safely utilised for thousands of years. In contrast, GE crop technology causes many mutations and has only been used commercially for 10 years. So no long-term studies on the impacts on human health because it's only been used for 10 years. We don't know what this experiment is going to create. Okay, despite the differences between the two, safety assessment of GM foods has been based on the idea of substantial equivalence, which you know what that is. However, several animal studies indicate serious health risks associated with GM food consumption, and I've been running through them. And Monsanto will tell you, and the people that control the introduction of these seeds plants will tell you there are no health problems. So there's risks associated with GM food consumption, including infertility, immune dysregulation, accelerated aging, dysregulation of genes associated with cholesterol and synthesis, insulin regulation, cell signaling, protein formation, and changes in liver, kidney, spleen, and the gastrointestinal system. There is more than a causal association between GM foods and adverse health effects. There is causation, as defined by Hill's criteria. Now, those are criteria you have to meet. You can look it up on the net. The great thing about the net is we can all be well informed. It's great. I love it. So there is causation as defined by Hill's criteria in the areas of strength of association, consistency, specificity, I always get that wrong, biological gradient, and biological plausibility. The strength of association and consistency between GM foods and disease is confirmed in animal studies. All the other criteria have also been strongly supported by animal studies. So time constraints prevent me from going into this in more detail here, but you guys can look it up. So I'm going to finish off. I don't know if you want me to keep talking about your health and things, so I kind of get nervous when I just keep talking and everyone just... In spite of this risk, the biotechnology industry claims that GM foods can feed the world through production of higher crop yields. However, a recent report by the Union of Concerned Scientists reviewed 12 academic studies and indicates otherwise. The several thousand field trials over the last 20 years for genes aimed at increasing operational or intrinsic yield of crops indicate a significant undertaking. Yet none of these field trials has resulted in increased yield in commercialised major food feed crops, with the exception of BT corn. However, it was further stated that this increase is largely due to traditional breeding improvements. So no improvements anywhere and health impacts. Therefore, because GM foods pose a serious health risk in the areas of toxicology, allergy and immune function, reproductive health, metabolic, physiologic, genetic health, and without benefit, the AAEM believes that it is imperative to adopt the precautionary principle, which is one of the main regulatory tools of the European Union in health policy and serves as a foundation for several international agreements. So it's interesting what physicians are now asking people to do. Listen to this, and then I'll finish up. With the precautionary principle in mind, because GM foods have not been properly tested for human consumption, and because there is ample evidence of probable harm, the AAEM asks physicians to educate their patients, the medical community and the public to avoid GM foods when possible. And provide educational materials concerning GM foods and health risks. That's extraordinary. Physicians to consider the possible role of GM foods in the disease process of patients they treat. So if you're treating one, find out whether they're eating GM foods. And to document any changes in patient health when changing from GM food to non-GM food. This is from the AAEM. Our members, the medical community and the independent scientific community, to gather case studies potentially related to GM food consumption and health effects, begin epidemiological research to investigate the role of GM foods on health, and conduct safe methods of determining the effect of GM foods on health. In conclusion, for a moratorium on GM food, implementation of immediate long-term independent safety testing and labelling of all GM food. I was going to talk about bees, but I see Lance is here and he's going to talk about bees. Because it was focused on Monsanto, I didn't talk about bees, but I think bees are probably infected, if you think about it, or affected by the impact of Roundup on gut bacteria, because bees need their gut bacteria too. Thank you very much. This gives me heart. I've been on the Organics Council when the standard was brought in. I'm so pleased to see you all here. I'm so pleased to see you keep on fighting. Great.
Thank you. So why are we here again? I forgot. Was it? No Monsanto. No Monsanto. No Monsanto. No Monsanto. No Monsanto. No Monsanto. Monsanto. Woo. Thanks, guys. And yep, we're going to bring up Michelle Schiefer. She was coordinator for the international campaign with Greenpeace, and she's now working with Australia GM Free Alliance. Thank you, Michelle. Give her a warm hand.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me at the back? Great. I've worked on every continent around the world with people just like you stopping GMOs, and we've done pretty good so far. I say this because in the early 90s, Monsanto's master plan was to take over control of the entire food chain. Okay? The entire food chain. Every major grain crop you eat, every major fruit and vegetable you eat. They didn't win. Okay? We've done pretty good, everybody. What they have done is the first crop they spread around the world was GM cotton. And about 90% of Australia's cotton is GM, unfortunately. And one thing we have to really watch is up in the Kimberleys, where we had this great environmental victory just recently where they didn't let James Price Point, the gas big pipeline, go ahead. They are looking at expanding GM cotton up there. So that's something, as Australians, we have to really look at protecting a World Heritage Area, what should be a World Heritage Area, from that expansion. Now, as Paul mentioned, for many years, people like us stopped GM crops apart from cotton in Australia. For many years, we had a moratorium state by state. It was so much work getting every single state to stop growing GM canola. That was the first crop they want. We call it the door opener crop. They allowed GM canola eventually into New South Wales, Victoria, and later Western Australia. So they're the 3 states that grow GM canola. Now, South Australia, Tasmania, ACT, and Northern Territory still have a ban against GM canola, so the country is divided at this point. And there is so much pressure on a state like South Australia, which basically is resisting being bordered by us, New South Wales, Victoria, and Western Australia. They're still staying GM free, and I'll tell you what, there's a lot of buyers coming from Europe and Japan to buy canola from South Australia. They're not coming to New South Wales anymore. So in Sydney, what can we do? There is a danger that new crops will be approved. It's been pretty good to stop it just at canola and cotton in Australia. Globally, I'll just say quickly, the other crops that you have to watch out for is corn or maize, as it's called in some countries, and beet, sugar beet, which is grown only in North America, and soy. They are the only commercial crops that are GM in the entire world. So that's why I'm saying we did pretty well stopping them taking over the entire food chain, right? And people are very active all around the world. Today, I think there's 400 different activities such as the one we're at now in different countries all around the world. Amazing, hey? And as you know, I think a lot of you are here because you've heard what's been happening in North America recently. And, you know, there's been a lot of movements like with the moratorium in California, people trying to get at least their products labelled, because most of the corn and soy grown in the US, and that's in so many things, they use it in corn syrup and cornstarch instead of sugar. Like, estimates are 90% of processed food in North America is actually GM now. Luckily in Australia we don't have that yet, so that's another reason why it's really important that we're active too. So what to avoid? If you have any processed foods that come from North or South America, you have to be pretty careful and really read the labels, and if it's got corn or soy in it, I wouldn't buy it basically, because it probably is GM contaminated. Soy and corn in Australia is fine. We heard a couple of speakers talk about GM wheat. Now, Australia is one of the major exporters of wheat. We're one of the major agricultural exporters around the world. At various times, we've even been number 4 because we have so much land mass, and we just industrial farm the shit out of it, basically. So what we export is also important for the rest of the world too, because we're spreading this stuff around the world too. There's also been a lot of information about studies on cows that are fed GM crops, and a lot of the soy and the corn is used for feeding cows and chickens and cattle and sheep in countries where they don't do open grazing. And there's a lot of studies that even in the mouth of a cow you can detect that they've been eating a GM organism, so let alone how that goes up the food chain once we eat the cows and the sheep. I also was very inspired recently. I was in India late last year, and there's millions of small-scale farmers in India, as you can imagine. And when I was there in October, India, the government passed a ban even on GM field trials. Isn't that amazing? Even on field trials. So, you know, we can get inspiration from the success that's happening in these other countries, and it took 10 years for them to do it, but it was pretty amazing. Another country where there's been a lot of resistance is Brazil, and for many, many years there were court cases from local environmental and consumer groups holding up GM soy being grown in Brazil because it's the 3rd biggest grower in the world of GM of soy. That battle eventually got lost, but there's still huge resistance there. And just to show you how important it is, the Amazon is being cut down for soy farming. That is why it's being cut down. I've actually flown over it and seen it myself. And after the soy farming comes the cows and the cattle on the hilly area. The flat is for soy. And the soy is not used in human consumption. It is then used to feed chickens in Europe or in China. So we're cutting down the Amazon to feed chickens. So what we can also do is think a lot about what we eat, not just even avoiding GM, but just, the whole industrial agricultural landscape, because Monsanto is at the apex of that. Like having GM crops where the farmers don't own the seeds, and they're even working on crops where it's Terminator technology, they call it, named after Arnie, I guess. But they're talking about where crops can no longer reproduce, the seeds are sterile. So it's actually the opposite end of biodiversity, where a farmer no longer owns the seed. The chemical company that made Agent Orange owns the seed. And we all know what happened to Agent Orange in various countries. The other reason why we have GM crops, it's pure economics from Monsanto. Basically, the Roundup patent, which is the pesticide you buy to go with the seed. See, it's about money. They sell the farmer the canola seed, for example, and the Roundup pesticide goes with that because it's resistant to Roundup pesticide. So Monsanto gets double. You buy the seed and you buy their pesticide. Well, unfortunately for Monsanto, in I think mid-90s, the patents on many of their pesticides, the glyphosate, ran out. So that's how they got the money back, by promoting and producing the GM crops, the GM seeds. So another thing you can do, and I don't think personally you should use pesticides in your garden anyway, but discourage everyone from using Roundup, because that is the main money earner for Monsanto, basically. So that's something you can do, encourage people to not use Roundup. Also, another country which I thought might be inspiring for us to hear is in Russia. Also, there's absolutely no GM crops, and that is because the Russians were very suspect about North American-based multinational corporations from St. Louis. So Russia has a total ban, and it's the largest country in the world. Other countries that have a ban, France, in Britain, I used to live there. I'm from Australia, but I used to live there, and they did a number of studies that found that you shouldn't release GM crops into the environment. It killed the hedges and the butterflies and a lot of insects in the hedges. And do you know what people did? They had field trials, and citizens in this movement called Genetic Snowball went out and they dug up the field trials all over the country, all over England, all over Scotland and Wales. Needless to say, that the opposition was so paramount, combined with those reports, that even today there's no GM crops grown in anywhere in the UK or Ireland or France or many other countries in Europe. What about China? Good point. It was quite a long battle in China because the government wanted to develop GM crops, and there was a huge struggle inside China over the last 10 years, but now the Chinese government has a more anti-GM position, which is great, and they decided to not develop GM rice. They would have been the first country in the world that would have brought forward GM rice, so even activism in China has had a big impact. They just destroyed 3 shipments of corn from which country? From the US. From the US. Fantastic. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to have these shipments going around the world and not allowed into ports as well. So it's really an economic hit for Monsanto's and the US government in that stage. So back to New South Wales. We can call for a reversal of the GM canola that's grown in this state. Again, we're one of 3 states that are actually actively promoting it and actively putting pressure on other states like South Australia to lift their ban. So that's something we can do. We should call for a reversal of the McDonald, who you've seen in all the papers, approval of GM canola here just a few years ago. We can call for a reversal. When we call for a reversal, also it makes it very hard for them to introduce new crops. And the big one that's looming in Australia is GM wheat. There's a number of great reports against GM wheat on the Gene Ethics website, which is that one, and also Greenpeace. Now, no country in the world grows GM wheat because they're really scared that us, the consumers, are going to say no. They were trying to introduce it into Canada and the US in about, I think it was 2002, and they failed because the farmers and the consumers aligned together and stopped it. So they stopped it there, and what these companies do, and it's not just on this issue, they move to the place of least resistance, okay? And in their eyes, when they took a world view, whereas a large industrialized agriculture company where there's not a lot of resistance that we could try to pop up GM wheat again, and they chose Australia. So that goes to show you how relevant Australia is in the entire chain around GMOs. So we need to be very vigilant in making sure that we aren't making bad history, basically, in allowing us to be the first country in the world to grow GM wheat. So let's all stay active. Now, the other thing you can do as an individual is there is this True Food Guide, which is also on the internet, and that will tell you which companies in Australia have a GM-free policy and which don't. Basically, about 90% of canola is used by one company called Goodman Fielder, and they make tip-top bread and things like that, which, if you're healthy, you probably don't really eat anyway. But you can discourage other neighbours, friends, family from eating that. But at the moment, I think they still have a GM-free policy. So Goodman Fielder, Unilever, Nestle, they're the big companies that you can write to saying, you know, it's really important you don't allow GM crops. The reason I'm not saying let's promote labelling, I think we should say we need labelling and keep really vigilant about it. But a couple of years ago, we had a big review, as this gentleman said, about labelling, and we lost. We lobbied very, very hard. We had tens of thousands of signatures to label GM food in Australia, but the government is literally, you know, falling in line with what Monsanto and the companies want, so we haven't got that one. But that shows you what we're up against, and it shows you why it's important that the individuals and the consumers take things into their own hands. I think at the moment we don't know the real figures because there's a lot of secrecy around this, but I think it's around between 7 and 9% of the canola grown in New South Wales is GM, and we think it's similar in Victoria and slightly less in Western Australia, but we don't know. If you walk through a canola field, it's that bright yellow flower, you just become covered in pollen. So it shows you how very easily it spreads to like the neighbouring fields, and that's the court case we have in Western Australia with Steve Marsh. So it's really important that we remain vigilant and that we don't allow these crops to expand as the number one thing, but then that we start to turn it around and we ask that they actually get recalled. And we have to be quite vigilant if we end up with, not that the federal AOP are strongly anti-Monsanto anyway, but the other side might even be worse. So we have to be very careful with the wheat, and also that we don't get GM corn. So that's kind of the overview. Australia is more important than we might initially think in the whole scheme of the Monsanto strategy. And I think they have underestimated how much resistance there is now in Australia. So I think, you know, having this rally and having future rallies, and thank you to the organisers. Let's hear it for Adam and John. And Adam's in a green vest somewhere, I saw. Anyway, but you know, this is really an important step because the more they will be watching this, they'll be noticing it, and the more we can turn back the clock and stop GM wheat and other crops coming into Australia, the better off A, we will be, and B, our impact on what we export to countries like China will be as well. So look, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Michelle. So we have two more speakers. We have Lance and Katrina, who I can't find at the moment. But Lance is here, so Lance can come up. Lance is part of the president of the Sydney Transitional Organisation, and he's here to talk about what we can do. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, John. So basically, I'm from Transition Sydney. It's a global movement. Sorry, can everyone hear me now? It's a global movement of community groups around the world, and what we look at doing is transitioning from a fossil fuel-based economy onto a community-based, localized economy. So we look at a number of different areas, from food security to transport to medicine to education, you name it. And obviously GMOs is a major, major issue for us. I'd just like to clarify one thing that Monsanto have been doing on their website. I don't know if anybody's ever visited their website, but they claim to be promoting sustainable agriculture. Unfortunately, I don't know if anybody else has. I've certainly complained to the ACCC for the misleading advertising that they have on their website. And they assure me that the only thing that's lacking is the number of complaints. So if anybody has a spare moment, please call up the ACCC and tell them that you would like to complain about Monsanto's false advertising, their use of the word sustainable agriculture on their website. Just in case there's anybody who doesn't know much about farming, the way Monsanto's agricultural systems work is, if there's a problem, it's a lack of something in their opinion. So if there's a shortage of nutrients, it's not because you've mined the bejesus out of the soil, it's actually because there's a lack of nutrients, so you need to put more nutrients on. If you have a pest problem, if you have a fungus, what do you need? You need more fungicide. If you have insects, you put more insecticide. What that means, whatever the situation, you need to put more on. In permaculture, we call that moron farming. Thank you. The reason we call that moron farming is because we know with permaculture farming practices, there are much more sustainable ways of farming. We know that you can obtain a yield. We know that by contributing to the natural ecosystem, that will produce more from that ecosystem. We know that if you completely decimate forests for the sake of monocultures, we know that's going to destroy the biodiversity, and well, guess what? We all depend on that biodiversity for our lives. I would certainly urge Australia's government to embrace the People's Food Plan. The People's Food Plan is the first crowdsourced policy document set up by the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance. What it does, it outlines ways of local food systems. It outlines ways that we can build local resilience into our food systems, and various other ways that we can have a more sustainable food system. The way we get herbicides, the way we get pesticides is we mine fossil fuels out of the ground, we pull those out and we turn those into the pesticides. It's the same for the fertilizers. All that coal seam gas mining, that's to make fertilizers as well as other things and energy and so on. So those systems are unsustainable. They're completely unsustainable. And what we need to do is start supporting our local farmers. We need to get out to the farmers markets. I'm sure there's a few on today. And if there's one thing you take home with you today from this march or talk, whatever, if there's one thing you take with you today, I want you to go home and do an audit of your refrigerator. I want you to introduce yourself to somebody else here today, meet somebody new, and make a deal with them so that you're more accountable to it. Go home, do an audit of everything in your fridge, do an audit of everything you buy on a monthly basis. You take this little Greenpeace True Food Guide with you, and just make sure that nothing, not 1 cent of your hard-earned money, goes to support these industrial agricultural systems that we are trying to get rid of. And finally, I'd like to ask, whatever you do, try and start growing a little bit of food at home. It's the most important. It's the most important step towards food sovereignty, towards food security, and guess what? It's fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Awesome talk. Okay, so there's one more person, but I cannot find them. Katrina, if she's in the crowd, she can come up. If not, then okay. So there's. Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Can I just say a few things and then you can come up? Okay. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and it may seem a little bit overwhelming. We all have busy lives, or we are all there's lots of things that we are doing in our own lives, and we may have some kind of personal things that we're dealing with, or our community, our work, our family, friends, etc., etc. So even just like choose one of the many things that we can do, and focus on it for half an hour a day, writing a letter to an MP, going through your cupboard, talking to people about this issue, a casual talk, just slowly spreading the seeds of knowledge, and over time these seeds will grow into plants of truth. It's a farmer. Farming is a long-term thing. As seasons come and seasons go, and a farmer and people who grow plants, it takes time for a plant to grow strong, and it requires our attention. So if we give our attention to these things on a daily basis over a period of time, eventually it would have grown to be this strong plant of truth. And that is how change will happen over a long period of time. Monsanto have been doing this for a long time, but they only have money on their side, and money is temporary. Money comes and goes, but the real value is community, and the real value is the people and humans around the world that bring value to the money. So Monsanto may be able to dangle the carrot of money, over our governments, over our various scientific institutes, over various countries around the world. But the grassroots people, we see that and we can move beyond that, and to grow to a more sustainable community in the future for our children and their children. And we have, what's your name? Andrea. Andrea would like to talk.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm standing up before you today. My name is Andrea Glazier. And I stand before you as an empowered citizen. I'm not from any organisation, any charity, any NGO. I'm not here representing any party, any cause, or any company. I am here speaking out because in my heart, I know this truth. We are the ones we are waiting for. It is time for us to rise up and reclaim our power. As citizens of the world, as people of this planet. No one else is going to fix this or rescue us. It is us. We are the ones. It is time for us to find our voice and stand up for what we believe. Live in accordance with our highest values. Focus on creating and implementing the solutions. Become engaged with debate. Banish the thinking that says it's too hard. If we want a fair, just, harmonious, equitable, peaceful world, we need to create it. Not just in thought or word, but indeed. We need to take action, like this march today. Show our politicians that we care about the planet and the destruction being wreaked on it by unaccountable, tax-avoiding, profit-driven corporations who are polluting and poisoning the planet for profit. If we analyse the GM industry's humanitarian claims, we see they are nonsense. They trot out the line that GM food will solve the world's hunger. But you know what? There is enough food in the world today. We don't have a lack of food, we have an abundance of it. It's just not getting distributed. The poor cannot afford it. It is our food system that is the problem. And no amount of additional GM food is going to solve this problem. This is the kind of justification dreamt up by well-paid PRs who write propaganda to manipulate the masses. These kinds of claims are trotted out by suit-wearing experts on our mainstream media because it's written on an official-looking press release, and our journalists accept it as fact. There's a wider problem here. Our journalists accept the status quo. They don't challenge, they are part of the problem. We don't have an independent media. We only need to look at Channel 9 and their refusal to broadcast Greenpeace's advert earlier this month, showing how plastic bottle waste from drinks manufacturers like Coca-Cola are washing up and destroying our seabirds. And why? Because Coca-Cola have spent millions fighting legislation to bring in a nationwide plastic recycling scheme. As a former journalist who worked in the heart of broadcast media in the UK, I can tell you that the truth is frequently a casualty of advertising revenue. Truth is frequently a casualty of story. Truth is frequently a casualty of resources. The media love nothing better than a shiny suit soundbite, an expert from the status quo, feeding the machine with easily packageable stories. We have to recognise that the mainstream media is failing us. If we want the full picture, it's up to us to do our own research, drill down deeper, read intelligent articles, even books. Use our bullshit detectors. The truth is that corporations are getting a stranglehold on many of our Western governments and are manipulating, bribing, and using underhand tactics to control the world's resources. Nothing could be more frightening than how Monsanto and the biotech industry is now dominating the world's food and seed supply. This has been happening behind the scenes. Many of us have been too stressed, too tired, too busy, overwhelmed, or we felt disillusioned, disconnected, scared, and powerless. And these corporations, well, they've been working in the background, influencing politicians and government policy with lobbying, sweeteners, overseas trips, jobs on the board. If you look on the internet, you'll see it's full of people who have been named and shamed. People who spent years employed by Monsanto as lobbyists, who are now working for the government, signing off the very documents and legislation that they were working for Monsanto, lobbying for. And I hate to say it, but it's no better in our scientific institutions. Where does the money come? Well, it comes from corporations. This week, I was horrified when I was doing research. I discovered that cows are producing human breast milk. Now, this isn't something from a horror story, and I urge you all to look this up when you get home. This is a fact. Universities in China, but also next door in New Zealand, the University of Waikato, they've genetically engineered cows with human genes to produce human breast milk. I'm sorry, am I losing you?
Does anyone else get a say? Because, you know, we've all come here to hear from the experts.
These are genetically engineered cows and they're cloned. And something went wrong with the cloning process because they were cloned without a tail. But the scientists are reassuring us that there's nothing wrong with the milk and it's going to be on our shelves soon. Am I the only one who finds this tasteless? Here in Australia, there's an Aboriginal community in Moray. And they're calling for a government task force right now. That community is closely involved with the production of GM cotton. But you've got death and disability skyrocketing in Moray. You've got cancer and spina bifida. These illnesses and diseases are going through the roof. And the local MP there is calling on the government to investigate if it's GM cotton, because it seems to be the causal link between all of these things. This community is being affected, perhaps, by the sprays and the pesticides that they're using. Now, I ask you, is this the kind of, are we the kind of people that are going to stand by and watch that community die of cancer and spina bifida because they're working with all of these chemicals? Glad to hear it. Really, I just want to ask you to look into your hearts about the kind of world that we're creating here. The kind of world that you want to raise your children in. Are you hoping that it's the next generation that are going to sort out the mess? Or the generation after? It's us that are causing these problems. And it's us that needs to solve them. We need to change our behaviour. You and I. We need to stop supporting these industries with our dollars. To echo everything all of the speakers have said here today, and Lance, if there's one thing I can urge you to do today, it's think about the 3 things that you can do differently as a result of attending this gathering. Do that before you leave here. Do that, if you care to, after I finish speaking. Think about the 3 things. Because it's one thing to come here today and being exposed to all of this good stuff. But if we leave here and we do nothing, where's the change? We have to do something differently. So, thank you for listening to me. I've never done anything like this before. I just hope that by standing up, I'll inspire other people to do the same, because it's what we need right now. We need people to stand up.
Thank you, Andrea.